Welcome. It's great to have you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, Geek?
Good seeing you again. Yes, so my background is actually in electrical engineering and computer science. I did my bachelor's and my master's in those fields, focusing in robotics and machine learning. Very early on, I was fortunate enough to have been part of two mid-sized exits. Nothing fancy, but enough to kind of fuel my entrepreneurial spirit. And I wanted to basically go ahead and do a company, but I didn't have necessarily the great idea that I wanted to sink my teeth into. And so ended up at McKinsey and at Stanford with the hope of basically finding an idea that big companies can't solve by themselves.
That's great. And is that what led you to found Clerkie, or are there other aspects of what made you excited about the startup?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. That's how the idea for Clerkie came about. So for context, I've been working at McKinsey for 5 years or so. And that's where I met all of my co-founders, and we had spent a lot of time pretty much working with the big banks, helping them solve the debt problem that they were facing. And so our primary task was to basically deploy digital solutions that would streamline things like settlement or digital banking, or help basically customers find the counseling they need to basically get out of debt. And in the process of doing so, one of the major realization that we had is that every time we deploy some of these solutions, there's still a lot that would be left on the table that the banks would struggle with, be it because of their legacy systems, or they couldn't attract the right talent from an ML perspective, or just plain regulatory restrictions that prohibited them from doing some of these activities. And so we started talking to some of their boards and realized there was a big gap in the market to address some of these needs. Most of the debt providers that are out there are fairly arcane, and their process tends to be very human driven. And so that's kind of how the idea for Clerkie came about.
Oh, that's great. And so when you think about the company, what are your ambitions for it?
Yeah, I think for us, the way we look at it, we would like to have a ubiquitous financial automation platform that focuses on debt. So you can think of it in the early days, similar to Credit Karma, but instead of focusing on credit score, we want to focus on debt. What we've realized is kind of debt is one of the major issues in this country, and it's one of the major levers that underpins your financial health. If you have too much of it, you can't reach your financial goals. For instance, you can't buy a house. And if you don't have any credit history, similar thing, right? You can't necessarily get the loans to buy a car or buy a house and so forth. And so that's kind of what we want to use as a launching pad. But looking forward, in the future, we also want this to be the financial platform that the banks use to make faster and smarter loan decisions, but also that users come to for any financial goals that they want to reach. We want to be able to automate that in one swoop.
That's great. Wonderful ambition. So it's early days for us, but has Vestigo been helpful so far? Are there ways we can be more helpful?
Super, super helpful. I think you guys have been incredible thought partners, especially now that we've basically scaled the revenues and basically grew that by I believe it was 35% or so in the last month. So definitely appreciate the support. Always enjoy getting some of the thoughtful articles that you guys have been sending our way, but also the business and commercial relationship introductions that you guys have made. So really appreciative of the partnership that we've established so far.
That's great. Thank you. Why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit more on myself, and maybe leading that a little bit towards what's going on with Curu as well. I'll probably start very quickly there. So Curu is a solution and integration for banks, credit unions, and lenders. We enable them to grow an acquisition by recovering their rejected and abandoned accounts. So our solution helps improve their credit score and bankability to make them eligible, not just say for that initial loan, but for student loan refinances and other products thereafter. So a little bit of my background leading up to here. Back in university, I was studying on a full ride scholarship from Bill Gates, the Bill Gates Scholarship, or the Gates Millennium Scholarship. And my co-founder, Ab Kapoor, is also studying on a full ride, and he was studying computational finance and engineering. But when we were applying for off-campus living the next year, we both ended up getting rejected, only because we didn't have established credit scores. So it's pretty ironic because our heads were in the field and our scholarships would have fully covered housing, but that ended up being our first issue or rough experience with credit. And then just from there, we thought initially, maybe that was just us and it was a small problem, even though, large for that being housing. But then we discovered that many other people faced a very similar problem. So whether it was students, immigrants, those that are underbanked, a lot of underserved groups ended up really falling to the situation where they had challenges with credit, couldn't get approved. And that really stemmed off towards, eventually becoming that initial pain point and problem that led towards us earning certifications in credit counseling, that built up towards different technical solutions that eventually led towards the solution I met earlier of providing a path to approval for lenders and banks.
That's great. And I think that's what's so interesting about it is how you put yourself into the B2B play, helping consumers. Are there other aspects of now that you've started Curu and you're underway that you find interesting about what your vision has been for the company?
Yeah, one thing that's really exciting. So we closed our seed round with Vestigo and you guys leading just a couple of months ago. And within that time frame, so about 3 weeks ago, Apple announced Path to Apple Card. So for people that are rejected for the Apple Card, or what would be rejected for the Apple Card, so say you need a 700 credit score to be approved, but you have a 680, instead of being rejected, you're given a congratulations, here are the steps you need to take. And over the next month to 5 months, it gets you on an action plan to get approved. And at the end of that, you get the Apple Card. So just from a $1 trillion brand and huge market validation or headwinds towards our solution, now Apple is doing that exclusively for their Apple Card solution. But we're a first mover in white labeling or enabling the solution for banks and lenders, and seeing a lot of the commentary on like YouTube or TechCrunch of people saying like every major lender should adopt a solution like this, or providing this, is just very mission oriented or a huge win-win. I love seeing that, and allows, a lot of noise for us to, get a lot of reception. So right now, even though things are, challenging or changing because of COVID, and I think everyone understands that as a reality, I think our solution really much is relevant and is connecting with a lot of banks and users say when financial wellness, being strong for your finances, savings, credit matters a lot, matters most.
Yeah, and it's great to have a major brand endorse the concept, right? They will force, smaller financial institutions, which is everybody else, since they're so giant, right?
Right.
To really adopt this. So that's a great endorsement of what you're doing. That's wonderful. And so when you think about ambitions for the company, what are your ambitions?
Yes. So our vision, or maybe I'd even start with our mission. So the mission with Curu, what we started with, was to eliminate credit rejection. So we see that as, if we're putting like a metric towards that, changing it from, at least 1 million people that would have initially gotten rejected for these opportunities to then be approved. And how we do that is by providing everyone a path to approval. So the status quo right now, especially, in finances, is if you're applying for, say, a loan or, a financial product, and you wouldn't immediately be approved, is without many other options, you're kind of looked at or treated as a deadbeat, find some other option, figure it out, and come back if you're ready. That's very unfortunate, but a lot of banks and companies, end users, seeing value in, here are the steps you need to take, still bank with me, or we do care about servicing you and making sure you have that right path. And in our vision, we see, right now the legislation mandate is that people or lenders, when someone is rejected, you have to send them a rejection letter, letting them know that it was likely because of their FICO score, and notifying them that, they were screened, their credit was pulled, and they got rejected. We want to change that. Instead of being a notification of rejection, is mandating every lender is required to provide everyone a path to approval. So really changing that status quo for that engagement for lending products. It's no longer a dead end and you're trapped. It's, this is what you need to do to get or reach your goal.
No, that's great. That again, huge green field for the companies. That's fantastic. So we have been working together just a short time, but we're just curious whether Vestigo's been able to be helpful to you and the team.
Yeah, so it's been a pleasure working with Mike, with Fraser, with you, and I'd say, I think our team has been pretty resourceful of working with our different stakeholders. But I would definitely say like Vestigo and your team have been, or Mike primarily and your team have been great and extremely just well networked and plugging us in with different networking opportunities or stakeholders from the network may be interested, worthwhile connecting. So recently, Mike and I synced up yesterday, and we connected over Mass Challenge and their new enterprise and corporate partners. So we see a lot of synergy there. We made an intro from existing portfolio companies to explore synergies and relationships. So Acorn Finance, Flywire, towards others in the network like Horseman, et cetera. So the list will continue to go on. But you guys have truly been quick to make connections and meaningful relationships. So building those has definitely been value add. And then just on the other side, we're continuing to, vet out our model, conversations on whether, again, that's pricing or model,
Mhm.
expediting adoption for enterprise deals. You guys definitely have a good network of portfolio companies and experience yourselves, which has been just a pleasure working with. So it's been enjoyable, and look forward to continuing to double down on how we're executing with you guys.
That's great. Thank you. Those are wonderful.
Hi, my name's Sohaib. I'm CEO at Railz, 2 times founder before. Building Railz this time, very excited for the alternative data stream.
That's great. And so what motivated you to found Railz?
Last company, PartnerStack, I was tasked to build a white label marketplace, and QuickBooks as their keystone account. Started working on that, realized that there are a little over 600 apps being built on top of QuickBooks who needed access to accounting data for alternative data stream for the purposes of valuation, cash flow apps, audits, lending, et cetera, for business application purposes. And I saw there's a massive gap that's not being addressed, especially for the developer side. Nobody is building a solution where they can enable companies, banks who need access to this data in a nimble, faster way. And that's prompted us to build Railz.
Well, that's great. And what are your ambitions for the company?
So today we're going after the obvious use cases, the lenders, the auditors, the valuation companies, the KYB, AML type companies in the fintech space. But really, as a function of our partnerships that we're building, we will see thousands of small, medium businesses flow through Railz network. And the accounting data repository is really the operating system of all these businesses. So we will be building a very robust data repository where we'll have a great insight into all these businesses. And we plan on building the next Facebook level data on these businesses in the future. That's
great. I love it. And so how has Vestigo been helpful to you so far? It's still early days in our relationship, or how can we be helpful?
Yeah, so it's very early, but the enthusiasm that we have seen from Vestigo's side, especially Fraser and Ian and you, Mark, as well, we've seen a lot of intros come our way. You have identified the low-hanging fruits for us right off the back. Fraser and Ian has done quite a lot of intros that we can get in, especially when you get in front of these big banks, there's a lot of steps and processes involved. We're able to eliminate all that and get to the right decision maker with the function of Vestigo on the board. That's the short term. The long term is really tossing off ideas with Ian and the Vestigo team in terms of what our strategy is going to be, how we're going to grab a bigger market share, operating either in North America or going across the pond into Europe, et cetera. And then hiring is another pain for a small, early stage startup. So really, getting into the nitty-gritties of the business, helping me out as a CEO in terms of looking into my blind spots as well. So the whole holistic picture, Vestigo has been very helpful so far.
That's great.